James Muscat came to Lisbon in 1995 from Melbourne, Australia. He was 12 years old at the time and was the only foreigner in his school. He described Lisbon as a sleepy city with a small town feel. He went back to Australia in 1996 but was eager to return to Europe. He spent a few years bouncing between Lisbon, Madrid, and Paris, seeking a cosmopolitan city. In 2010, James returned to Lisbon, started a business, and he saw the city starting to change.
Don't get me wrong, I mean, Lisbon has always had its charm. I mean, it's amazing weather, people are beautiful, I mean, very, very hospitable, very kind, very welcoming, food's great. I mean, and the city of Lisbon, I mean, we have so many beautiful spots, within a 40 to 50 minute radius, whether it's the river, the ocean, the mountains, Comporta, Sintra. So it's, I guess it had the sort of the characteristics, it had what it needed to be.
Like potential.
The potential is there. The potential has always been there.
Okay.
I spent 2 years in Tel Aviv, 2011 and 12, which was an amazing experience. But as I mentioned, in 2010, I had started a business, and in 2013, I actually decided to move back to Lisbon. And it was very different to what it is today. And don't forget, we're talking about 2013, so we're coming off the back of a global financial crisis.
Yeah,
right?
2008, 2009.
Yeah, I mean,
coming out of that, it takes a couple of years, right?
Yeah, and for us, it's always one of the good things with Lisbon as well. Lisbon and Portugal, right? It tends to take us a little while to get into the global financial crisis.
Didn't hit until a little later.
Yeah, a little later.
Okay.
2009, 2010. And 2013 was still quite a dark era. I mean, unemployment was skyrocketing. I mean, it was all about, Portugal, Spain, Greece, and Ireland. The potential of us sort of leaving the European Union. But at the same time, as I mentioned, you did see something happening. And it was great to see that, coming from Tel Aviv, which was this, mega sort of melting pot, international crowd, cosmopolitan startup hub, right? Or startup nation, as they would say. Coming here and sort of now understanding the signs. So you would, back in 2010 to 11, I mean, startups weren't even heard of in Portugal. At the Lisbon City Hall at the time, I remember that they had just started a new department, which was economics and innovation.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, at the time, the person that was behind that was Paulo Suedo.
Okay.
And I think that that was a sort of catalyst for a number of other things. Then we had an institution that was together, which was Invest Lisboa.
Okay.
And Invest Lisboa's main focus was all around attracting foreign direct investment.
I see.
To Lisbon, to the city of Lisbon, right? In a nutshell, I mean, I think that they did a bit of everything in the sense anybody that was interested in potentially moving to the city, they would go out of their way to sort of make sure that they could help them in one way or another.
Okay.
So you had the Economics and Innovation Department, you have Invest Lisboa, and then you have Startup Lisboa.
Okay.
And Startup Lisboa was one of our first, if not the first, incubator in the city of Lisbon. And it was a public, so it's sort of an organization that stems from the City Hall.
Okay.
Startup Lisboa. And I guess that was, in a sense, the birthplace of, in many ways, the birthplace of our startup ecosystem, which was non-existent.
Yeah,
right?
I see, okay.
This is one of the aspects that have helped, Lisbon and Portugal take center stage globally.
Yes.
But there are several others. And for example, Lisbon, great weather, great food, great higher education, so tertiary education, institutions. I myself have studied at one of them. And very affordable, very safe, right? Very open. So what does that mean? In terms of international students, exchange students, we would definitely, we were on the radar.
Sure.
And we had that double-digit growth in terms of more and more foreign students, especially European students under the Erasmus program, coming to Lisbon and to other cities around the country to be here for a 6-month or 10-month exchange program. But yeah, so we did start getting this, there was a lot of traction around international students, bringing this diversity, exposing more Portuguese students to, more foreigners, more Portuguese students going outside as well. So I think this exchange is fundamental for when they do come back, what they bring, the experience and the life experiences that they bring with them. We had at the same time a very important part of this, let's say, recipe was the government support. There's a lot of public-private, a lot of, on a city level and on a governmental level, a lot of people working together in terms of promoting entrepreneurship, in promoting, the international student market, looking at it finally as a product, and tourism. Tourism was another big one. But when I'm talking about they were supporting, I mean, there were, numerous amounts of organizations that were put together, new initiatives, as I mentioned, like incentives for cinema, incentives for attracting more expats, which, for example, the NHR program, which you probably heard about, which actually started back in, I think, 2008, but really only started taking off in 2011, 2012.
Once it starts getting promoted, people have experienced it, there's testimonies about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think all this came about at a very important moment because global financial crisis hit, and it hit hard. We needed to reinvent ourselves.
Okay.
We couldn't simply depend on the nanny state or the government.
Yeah.
So we really needed to sort of roll up our sleeves.
Okay.
And all these moving parts allowed for that to happen. Around that time, I don't know if you remember, but in 2011, we had the unfortunate uprising of the Arab Spring. Right?
That's right.
Fighting for democracy, but it turned sort of North Africa and parts of the Middle East into no-go zones for European tourists, right? So you start to get a lot of Europeans that were actually looking for alternatives.
I see.
And Portugal is one of them.
Right.
And we saw double-digit growth going on, for year on year.
Yeah.
And continuously up to pre-COVID.
Okay. So it sounds like you've set the stage for Lisbon's growth, right? So how about we walk around, take a look at some of the growth, and you continue to tell me more about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Let's go.
Yeah. So another thing is, with all of this happening, as we were talking about before, you started to really see more expats, looking at the city and looking at the country as a place to, potentially move to.
Okay.
As I mentioned, it would have started with, international students who are expats as well.
Yeah.
You had entrepreneurs, international entrepreneurs that were coming into the city, and then you saw more, bigger businesses setting up offices in Portugal, in the Lisbon area, and in the north as well.
And I assume it affected the real estate pretty significantly.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to real estate, there were a number of different factors, right? So we were talking about tourism, and we also spoke about, this sort of public-private collaboration. And on the government side, there were a number of incentives. The NHR was one of them that I had mentioned. Another major incentive or initiative that came through was the Golden Visa program, which you probably heard about before.
Definitely.
And at that time, that was in 2012 with the Golden Visa program. And that was where the IMF and the ECB were bailing out, a lot of the southern states. And in order to sort of, in exchange, they also wanted some changes to happen, right?
Right.
And one of the big changes that also happened here was the old rental laws were altered. They were changed as well, because we had frozen rents from, I think, the start of the dictatorship, mid to late 30s, that went all the way up until, post revolution up until the 2000s.
Frozen rents for decades.
Decades, yeah. I mean,
Wow.
you'd have people that were, they would be living in a, let's say, 100 square meter apartment in downtown Lisbon and paying 25 euros a month. Same with retail. Yeah. So this was obviously not an incentive since, property owners couldn't do anything about that. If they did invest to renovate, then they would still be getting 25 euros a month. So the math didn't work.
Right.
That actually did help the real estate market, develop and become more attractive, not only on a national level with, property owners, but also obviously on a global level with more
people wanting to invest.
Invest, exactly. So we have this happening. At the same time, you have the international students. We have the startup ecosystem growing. So this mix, or as I would say, how the stars aligned really gave, Portugal and Lisbon the opportunity to transform itself.
Okay.
With regards to the real estate, another propeller for the whole transformation was Airbnb. So you had the Golden Visa program, which was predominantly real estate investment. You had the rental laws that changed, and then you had Airbnb in 2014 coming up and being a great solution in terms of product, right?
Yeah.
You buy, you renovate, throw it on Airbnb.
Yeah.
Which allowed a lot of people to also make a decent living. We were able to provide, great solutions, alternative solutions for tourists as well. But Lisbon was a city which was quite decadent and derelict. People would be like, how can a capital city have so many buildings in such poor state, right?
Right.
8 years later, I mean, we have some amazing examples, a lot of amazing examples in terms of good quality renovation. So I mean, we're in late 2016, going to 2017. We've had our first web summit, which was a bit of a reward in a sense, right?
Yeah.
The startup ecosystem was 4 or 5 years in the making, and we have, we're awarded with the entrepreneurship, European Entrepreneurship Award for Lisbon. The web summit's moving. Interesting rounds of fundraising are happening. The venture capital community is slowly moving forward.
So what's the balance of the startups that are from Portuguese entrepreneurs and foreign entrepreneurs?
The balance in terms of proportion?
Like who's doing what? Yeah.
I mean, we definitely have a large foreign founder community. I wouldn't be able to sort of, in terms of exact statistics, but if I remember correctly, like for example in Startup Lisbon at one stage I had something like a 30-70 or maybe even a 40-60. Meaning 60 or 70 being local, and then the remaining foreign, which is still a pretty.
That's good.
It's really good.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of mixing happening there as well. I think when you have founders coming from all over the world and coming together, it just brings that much more of a global vision and diversity.
Right. Bringing those different ideas in, you have the local perspective to say this is how it'll translate here. But you have foreigners that can kind of like push the boundaries a bit.
Ask those questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, ask like the why not kind of questions. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
So we were talking about we're in 2017 now, right?
Yeah.
So we did start seeing, I think, two things here. It depends on which of the several stars we start looking at.
Yeah.
With any roads to growth, there are growing pains.
Sure.
Right? And we did start seeing that in, let's say, late 2016 or 2017, 2018, especially in the real estate market. Airbnb, real estate, a lot of real estate investments, house prices just continued to grow.
Yeah.
Gentrification was also taking its toll.
Yeah.
So you did start getting some pushback.
Who's pushing back though?
Locals, locals and
certain businesses, or
a businesses not so, depending on the business, but businesses not so much, but definitely locals, because that's where people were filling it in terms of their pockets. Rents went up.
Yeah.
Housing prices went up. In terms of tourism, where we used to have Lisbon and many other parts of the country to ourselves, all of a sudden we felt like we were in Madrid or Paris. I'm going back to sort of the growing pains. So as we're saying, the real estate, rentals, gentrification, because of those laws that did change back in 2012, you sort of slowly saw neighborhoods, residents being evicted or pushed out of these, typical neighborhoods like, Alfama or Bairro Alto, Santa Catarina, and a number of other historical neighborhoods, which at the end of the day was the reason why tourists were coming, right?
Right.
But it was sort of a
Catch-22.
Catch-22, right? We had buildings that were falling apart, people that were living in poor living conditions.
Yeah.
But if an investment needed to take place, obviously some sort of a return on investment needed to come. What they did decide to do was start putting quotas. So how are we going to slowly sort of restrict Airbnbs to not decharacterize, is that the word? Or completely change the face of these typical neighborhoods.
Right.
So they were putting restrictions and quotas in terms of the number of Airbnbs that could take place in these different historical neighborhoods. In 2018, this was reinforced. So there were more neighborhoods that were no longer available to Airbnb.
Okay.
And the same in 2019. And I think it was actually a good strategy. It needed to be balanced as well, because obviously we needed the foreign direct investment to come in, and there was a lot of business and economic activity that was dependent on that as well. And that was supposed to actually come out into effect into 2020.
Okay.
But obviously,
we know the story.
We know the story, right?
But it'll be the beginning of 2022.
Exactly.
Right? It'll be January 1st, 2022.
That this will take place. And what are they trying to do with this? So it will be Lisbon and Porto, and most of the coast.
Right.
And this is going hand in hand with their strategy to redevelop and, let's say, repopulate or stem the exodus from the interior to the bigger cities.
Okay.
How do we provide more opportunities? How do we provide better living conditions in the interior of the country?
Right.
So we had growing pains. We had, new policies coming in to sort of assist with those growing pains. And at the same time, I mean, in terms of, we were talking about international students before, and we were talking about the expat community, and we were talking about the startup ecosystem. I mean, these have all flourished, and they've reached a level of maturity now. Yeah. So we're looking at 211, 212, and now we're in like 218, 219, 220, where Lisbon is one of the hottest places on the planet for expats.
Yep.
And now it's
We're seeing it.
We're seeing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's that diversity that I was always looking for back in the early 2000s is here. So
Awesome.
Lisbon is seen as a serious startup hub now.
Cool.
And this has been 7-8 years in the making. Not without its growing pains, as we discussed. And a lot of people have said to me, so what about Lisbon? I'm like, we've had our several golden decade.
Yep.
Next we'll be going up to our platinum. Platinum to come, right?
That's right.
The foundations are there.
Yeah.
We're on the map. And it's all come together. And I think a big part of this has been, it is a very welcoming country, a welcoming city. So people do somewhat take that upon themselves. They become somewhat patriotic. We saw this in COVID as well, which was really nice. We saw an association that came together of expats that had been benefiting from the NHR program, that flat tax rate, 20%, 10 years.
Yes.
So they all came together and did a lot of fundraising during the COVID. And, we're also able to help in terms of, distributing food and soup kitchens and stuff like that. But beyond that, you also see it in people, the way people talk to other expats, and how they defend Lisbon or Portugal, or try to convince them that this is the place to be.
Yeah, it's such a neat aspect because my wife and I, we've been here for 8 months now, almost 9 months. And we've noticed that the people are so, like the vast majority of people are so welcoming and ready to embrace us as foreigners. And we're ready to like channel our inner Portuguese and kind of let that out and adapt as quickly as we can. Language is one of the things, learning how to cook Portuguese food, that type of stuff. So that's interesting that you mentioned that. So it's not only, I think, from a technical standpoint of the citizenship, but when the expats start to feel like they owe something back to the place without actually owing something back from a technical standpoint, but they feel like it's coming from the heart.
From the heart.
That's a beautiful thing because not all places cultivate that. We've lived abroad for a while. Not all places cultivate that.
Yeah,
so that's cool. So can we take a look around the city a bit more, and you tell me about where you think the city's headed next? Like
where we're going?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Let's do that.
Sound good?
Sound good.
Let's go. So can you clarify what you mean about growth and maturity of the city?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, in terms of, we're speaking a bit about the startup ecosystem, tourism. More recently, for the city itself as well, we were awarded the European City of Sustainability.
Yep.
That was for 2020. We were reaching a level of maturity based on where we were in 2010.
Right.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, this has been our sort of golden decade where we've laid out the foundations for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Obviously, with 2020, with the whole COVID thing, there was a bit of a pause on a lot of things. But I actually think it sort of worked. There were a lot of negatives, but there were positives to take from that as well. And one of them was, giving us a chance to sort of look at the big picture again,
reevaluate, reassess.
Exactly, and just make sure that the Roaring 20s, the next decade, is going to be new growth, to a new level of maturity, right, in the right direction.
So what is the next stage? Where is Lisbon headed? Look into your crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at the city, I mean, as we mentioned, the European City of Sustainability, there's been a big push around sustainability, around renewables, around sort of the circular economy. And I think that we're seeing a lot more being pushed out, and this goes hand in hand with Europe's goals for the 20s, right? Looking at sustainability on one end, looking at digital transformation on another. And you're seeing this, for example, with the startup ecosystem as well, that you're starting to get a lot of focus on maritime or blue tech. I mean, we have the ocean, we have the rivers,
it's beautiful.
We have a lot, and we have history that sort of dictated a lot of the the explorations that took place. But there's just so much more to do with the oceans, to protect the oceans, and to also maximize them in a sustainable way, economically as well. So that's one area. A number of different areas around sustainability. Agri-tech is another area which is flourishing. I think social impact was something which was growing, and I think that looking at the next decade, it's going to be an area of growth within the startup ecosystem as well. It's tourism. Tourism is definitely another area, whether it's tourism tech or tourism as a whole. A lot of the funding, incentives and initiatives that have been laid out by the Tourism Authority and the Secretary of State are all focused on better quality, more around sustainability, and bringing this concepts around circularity within the tourism industry for the next and foreseeable future. That's definitely an area which is also heading in the right directions when it comes to the next decade. Startup scene we mentioned as well. I think the city as a whole as well. I mean, I think that one of the beautiful things about what's happened over the last decade, there's a certain energy, a certain community.
Yes.
That we have people locally that we've been attracting, people that are here and ready to do good for the city and the planet as a whole, right?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about is where do you see the future for expats, for foreigners being here? Are they going to continue to be welcomed? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I definitely think that when it comes to, they've always been welcomed. There has been, some hiccups in terms of tourism, but like I mentioned, there is this strong push for a more sustainable tourism as a whole. And with expats, there are new waves of expats that are coming in. We have a lot of expats coming in from the US and the UK at the moment for a number of different reasons, and that are coming here to settle down, start businesses, and to contribute as well. So I think that definitely, very welcome, and we're here waiting for them, I guess.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for meeting
you.
with me and telling me about Lisbon and its growth.
You're welcome. Thanks
Cheers.
a lot. Thanks.
If you are interested in learning more about Portugal, we've created a playlist just for you. Click on this playlist right here. Now let's get moving.